Good morning.
Morning.
We'll go ahead and get started since we're a few past 9:30. I appreciate everyone coming out with the slight inclement weather, but I'm Jeremy McPike, State Senator from the 29th District. This is in the 29th by like a half a block or quarter block, depending on which way you go, stretching out through Dale City and Manassas Park. We just started this legislative session a week ago Wednesday, so I'm not sure what the latest bill count is. We've got, I don't know, well over 4,000, I think, between both chambers. So there's a lot of reading, so if you see me blurry-eyed still and needing my reading glasses a little bit more often, you know why. The process, especially when we get started, there are lots of bills. We don't necessarily have a chance to read all thousands of bills in the first couple weeks. So if you see something that you think is out of place, and we're fine with sending us an email. We flag it, our staff flags it. We put notes in bills of different concerns that we receive. So that's always helpful feedback. This region is extraordinarily helpful because we have experts in almost every field because of its proximity to DC and folks from all over the world. And so we do find it extraordinarily helpful as we go through the legislative process. So before we get into more details, I'll let Senator Surovell say good morning and intro.
Right. Hi, my name is Scott Surovell. I'm the State Senator for the 36th Senate District. I live in the Mount Vernon area. The 36th District starts, kind of hard to describe, but sort of near Franconia Road, Springfield Mall, Woodrow Wilson Bridge. Comes down through Fairfax, the Lorton area, goes up Old Bridge Road around Occoquan, up towards the Chin Library, and it wraps around Potomac Mills, all the way down through here on the other side of Route 1, then back up 234 all the way up to close to the Prince William landfill. So I represent all Fort Belvoir, the Quantico Marine Corps Base, Prince William Forest Park, and then about 15,000 people in North Stafford, including the Widewater Peninsula and out Garrisonville Road, out 610 to the west. This will be my 11th session in the General Assembly. I was elected first in 2009, served in the House of Delegates for 6 years. Jeremy and I just both got reelected to our second term in the state Senate. Also, both of us just got elected vice chairs of the caucus in leadership positions. One other update for me is we all got brand new committees after we moved into the majority. I was dropped off of local government and off of the General Laws and Technology Committee, moved on to Commerce and Labor, Courts, Transportation, Privileges and Elections, and I still serve on the Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee, which Jeremy also serves on. But in the 11 sessions I've served, we've never had 4,000 bills. We usually see about 3,000, which most people still think is a lot for a 60-day session. We have to actually act on every single bill in our chamber by crossover, which is
February 11th.
Yeah, February 11ish, mid-February. And then after that, we work on all the bills that come over from the House of Delegates. So we've already started working on a lot of bills. I think we've probably pushed about 200 or 300, 400 bills out of committee in the first 10 days. The pace will start picking up really fast here in the next few weeks. But we both have pretty substantial legislative agendas. You should have received mine when you walked in. I think Senator McPike has his. We're here to talk about what we're going to do and also a little bit about some of the broader atmospherics going on within the legislature. There's some sort of big policy issues going on that we're going to have to vote on, debate on, have input in, etc. We want to talk about, including our $100 billion state budget. So this is also, with the budget, this is the long year. We do a 2-year budget in Virginia. And the reason we have a 60-day session is because we do the 2-year budget in the long session, and then when we come back next year, we just make little tweaks to it. We have a 45-day session. So you want to talk about your agenda first?
Sure. Also, my committees, I should have. I'm serving on Rehabilitation and Social Services, local government. I also have added, General Laws and Technology. I was on previously with Senator Surovell. Added Transportation as well as Rules Committee. So we, the 5 committees, both of us are also going to be quite busy trying to hear all those committee bills and present our own bills. We sort of get in that space-time universe of trying to present and serve in committees, so it gets very interesting during session. I'll do a broad overview real quick since it is the budget year. The governor proposed his budget, listing out some, I think, pretty important investments. First off, in education, rebenching re-benchmarking standard of quality for education. There's also significant investment in pre-K, both in innovation and expanding access, which has been something that we've been working on for a number of years, and it's good to see. For our K through 12, one of the, I think, big investments is our school counselors. Over the last couple of years, we started to make progress towards a ratio of 1 to 250 to our kids. As you know, kids have a framework that need additional support. And frankly, the school counselor is not only important for the well-being, mental health, but also the long-term career goals, and a national standard of 1 to 250. We've been 1 to 400 has been our past ratios. I mean, so as you think, if you're the school counselor trying to achieve and actually give some support and understanding where the kid's at, 1 to 400 is kind of a pretty significant stretch. So we're making some progress, at least in the proposed budget at this point, and we're hoping that that continues. Another major initiative with the governor's program is for access to community college. The G3 program, where those kids who frankly probably would never even thought about going to college, but have the skills to get some skills, have now access. If you qualify for a federal Pell Grant, there's a program that the governor's proposing that would give for targeted programs within our community colleges access to that free college. And that's, that's been a big miss in our workforce, and workforce development is having bright kids in school but just don't have, or think they have the financial wherewithal to get that next step, that next credential and certification. So obviously we have a lot of budget elements to go through and negotiations, but there's a significant progress in that regards. On transportation, there's still a couple of moving targets, pardon the pun, on that. But I think this year's announcement, one of the keys for this area was the Long Bridge project. If anybody rides VRE on the Fredericksburg line or Manassas line knows that we are bottlenecked, all those train lines bottlenecked right as they cross into DC. And we can't improve the number of trips or reverse commutes back here until we deal with the Long Bridge. So it's well over $1 billion. I don't know what the latest figure is, probably $1.4 or $1.5 billion. But there's a deal there with CSX and in partnership with others to begin to really move that project forward. So that'll be a significant impact to increasing. I think we're limited to 22 train trips a day on the lines. So that's not very many when you look at the number of cars that are on the road. And we all know that we can't add more lanes year after year. We've got to start to increase our rail capacity. So for our region, that's one of the most significant transportation investments in probably a decade, if not 2 decades, in terms of the real throughput and capacity for our region. So the early environmental assessments we're working through. There's lots more. It's going to take several years, obviously, if you can imagine adding lane miles. There are a number of other detailed things going on in the budget, but those are some really macro highlights. We are still, both in Senate Finance and Appropriations and House Appropriations, need to go through all the details and all the priorities, but those are some sort of macro issues that are happening with the budget. So, Scott?
Yeah, I'll just say with the budget, the governor's pre-K investments are historic. Virginia does not have a huge subsidized pre-K program. We have a lot of children in Prince William County that don't get any pre-K, and it's a real shame. If you don't show up for kindergarten, knowing how to sit in a circle, raise your hand to speak, use a pencil, you start off a year or two behind a lot of other children, and you never catch up. And so you'll see that program pay long-term dividends once we kick that off. The governor also is making some big investments in George Mason, which is big for Prince William County. Catch it up with some of the other higher education institutions like UVA, Virginia Tech, in terms of the level of state support. With regard to the transportation, the governor's proposed an 8-cent gas tax increase. When we raised taxes back in 2013 when I was in the legislature, I argued at the time that the amount of money we were creating only funded about 25% of what everybody knew our need was. Everybody said we solved the problem, but it was clear it wasn't nearly enough. That's why we still haven't been able to fund things like the 123 interchange in Prince William County, to complete the widening of Route 1, That's why we had to get Transurban to pay for the fixing the Occoquan bottleneck. It's why it took us 5 years longer than it should have to fund the Long Bridge project you just heard from Jeremy about. I mean, we still don't have enough money in our transportation system, and we still won't, even with this 8-cent tax increase, which will cost you maybe about $5 or $10 a year. Most people pay about $100 a year in gasoline taxes. Between gas taxes and car registration fees, you pay about $100 a year towards transportation. If you drive an electric car like me, you pay even less. And one of the other things that the governor's going to do is equalize car registration fees based on gas efficiency. So if you drive a hyper fuel efficient car like I do, you're going to pay more on your registration fee. If a gas guzzler, you'll pay less, so that everybody's contributing towards the road system more fairly, because cars are getting more and more efficient. So that's another proposal he's made to help balance the funding in our transportation system. Let's see, also on the budget, there's some other things that I'm working on. I have a list of budget amendments that I've listed on the back of at the very end of my legislative agenda. The number one thing that I'm trying to do, and Senator McPike is supporting me along with Senator Barker, is to fund a study for the feasibility of the extension of the Blue Line. That's probably a 10 to 20 year process, but we have to figure out how feasible it is, and if so, where it's going to run. It obviously can't run right down the train tracks because we already have VRE there. And with what's coming on VRE, it's going to massively expand VRE capacity. We're going to have weekend train service on VRE. We're going to have bi-directional service on VRE during the day. We can't do that right now. We're going to have high-speed rail. We're going to have a rail system, a train that runs all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, and then only stops in Richmond, Fredericksburg, Alexandria, and D.C. So we have some massive increases in rail service coming. It's going to be a big boon to this whole corridor up and down the East Coast. I've also got in a budget amendment to fund phase 2 and 3 construction at Widewater State Park. You know, we have Lee Sylvania right over here, and they have to shut it down on weekends because it gets completely filled up and overcrowded. And Widewater State Park is the newest park in our state park system. It's the only public water access in Stafford County. And we need to build out some more cabins. We need to build out a motorboat launch there. Right now there's a canoe launch, but there's not a launch for power boats. And we need to build out more facilities there. It's actually already getting very busy down there at Widewater. And I've also put in budget amendments for, what else do I got? It's about, I mean, I got a lot of budget amendments, I have a whole bunch of budget amendments, but not many of them are specific to Prince William County, but those. And you heard Jeremy talk about transportation also, and the Long Bridge thing's huge. The Occoquan bottleneck on I-95 is a big deal. We just had the first public hearing on that. There's a couple tweaks that I think most of us would like to see made. Right now, the way they've designed the road, it still goes down to 3 lanes and back to 4 for some reason. We'd like to stay 4 all the way down to the Prince William Parkway so it doesn't bottleneck. And you're going to see construction on that happen within probably the next 2 years because of the way it was funded. If we'd funded it the traditional method, it would have taken 7 years, but because the governor slipped it in the Transurban FredEx extension deal, you're going to see it happen in 2. So we still also have to fix the northbound 95. That's not addressed by this. It's only southbound that's fixed, but not northbound. The northbound, I mean, southbound is much worse than northbound. Northbound's still a problem. So we've also got $40 million coming into Dumfries for the widening, to start the planning and the right-of-way acquisition for Route 1 widening through Dumfries. I think you'll see the remainder of that funded probably in the next round of the NVTA, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, probably next year. But there's finally some money flowing to Eastern Prince William County when it comes to transportation, which I'm excited about. So do you want to talk about some of your bills?
Yeah.
You want to talk about some of the big bills? Or
I'll jump into it, and I'll just add to that. Prince William, we do have some, like George Barker on Senate Finance, but obviously Luke Torian serving as appropriation chairman in the House, which is an extraordinarily key position, is extremely helpful for Prince William County. Having the chairman that helps to guide the money discussion is this huge advantage, and we're happy to have him now that we have some shift in the leadership. So a couple things I'm working on this year, more specifically. I'm continuing some of the work I did over the last couple of years on natural gas pipeline safety. As you might remember, a couple of years ago, we had a home explode over off of Montgomery Avenue, and I tried to get the investigative report from the State Corporation Commission, couldn't get the report, so unfortunately I had to file legislation and pass the bill, because I think if you have an event like that, that you want some transparency as constituents. And even as a state senator, I couldn't get that information because they settled the case, they closed the file, and sent it off. So we passed legislation last year that now affords us access to information when we have that sort of disaster occur in our community. This year, based on the national NTSB's review of the Massachusetts home explosion incident with the natural gas, they also reviewed statewide. Virginia is one of the states that excludes natural gas companies from using a professional engineer to stamp their drawings. So I'm removing that exemption this year. I put a bill in to do that, to make sure there's additional eyes in engineering, reviewing all these drawings to increase our pipeline safety. The other thing is for lead water testing, as some of you might remember, in 2017 I passed the first lead water testing standard for our schools. Since that time we've had literally thousands of reports that are elevated in terms of lead in water in schools. It's not the water distribution system, it's actually the pipe, solder joints, and fixtures within the schools that still contain small amounts of lead. So I'm expanding that to make sure our Virginia Department of Health has access to those reports and information. And I have a budget amendment in also to increase their funding to help with the testing process and the remediation process. So we've barely just scratched the surface. Additionally, I've introduced legislation, again, it passed last year, but it was killed in the House, on also requiring lead water testing for child daycare facilities. As you know, lead impacts the neurological development of smaller kids more drastically than older adults. There's actually no standard right now. And I think as most parents, I've got 3 girls that they're way out of the child care range now, but my assumption as a parent was that all those facilities were checked and clean and no problem, and that's just not the case. So I'm making some both budget amendments as well as legislation to help support that. Let's see, I'm also working on misclassification of employees. You see a lot of this happen in the construction trades, unfortunately, that classify workers as 1099, but they're really employees under the federal law. So you have a lot of companies, unfortunately, that undercut other good companies because they don't have to pay the taxes. And what that means is all the other companies doing the business the right way, they're paying the taxes and covering these other folks. And so there really is very little enforcement in Virginia on worker misclassification. This bill would help to level the playing field and also push some fines and penalties for the bad actors. I mean, it's time that workers get paid what they should be paid and not sort of shuffled off. You see, unfortunately, a lot of some of them cash, or they have to cash their checks in different places to create fuzzy paper trails. There's all sorts of nefarious business that occurs. This actually helps them get some teeth in our enforcement and a framework to do that. A couple of things I've been working on for years is firefighter cancer presumption. Right now, we have a couple different issues within our code section. This year I've got a code that also adds brain cancer, colon cancer, and testicular cancer. These are been shown by OSHA and others to these are occupational directly linked. There's also a code section that's been complicating firefighter claims for years. So I'm striking that section of the code and cleaning it up. We just passed committee and is sent off to finance committee just last week. So we're I think, in pretty good shape. We've got a bipartisan support this year to do it, and we've been making some progress. So I'm hopeful. This has been my 5th year carrying it. I think this is the year we'll finally get that legislation passed. So sometimes legislation takes a long haul and a long journey to get there. It's not just submitted and it gets passed. We've got to go through 140 members and get a majority of those to agree, and that's really a part of the legislative sort of sausage making. It does take a lot of time in some cases, but I'm excited about that. I've also introduced the first legislation to cover PTSD amongst first responders. I did that last year. That was killed in Finance Committee. I'm bringing it back up again. It still has some fiscal impact, and we're working on a way to get there. I think you see over communities more recognition, the impacts like Virginia Beach, shootings, Virginia Tech, other things have on first responders. And right now that toll is really taken on the worker as well as their family over time. All these folks I know as first responders, they want to stay in the workforce. you know, a lot of these jobs, it's their second family. But unfortunately, some folks do have significant impacts of what they have to deal with on the job, and we need to figure out a way to recognize that. And right now, we don't. So I'll take a break. I've got a couple other things to talk about, but I also want to make sure we leave some time for questions. So, Senator Surovell.
Yeah, so I'm going to hit really quickly some of the big issues that are going on this session. Then I'm going to highlight a couple of my bills. First of all, you've seen a lot in the papers about firearm violence prevention. There's a whole series of bills that are out there that were introduced. The one that got, I think, the most attention was a ban on AR-15s. That legislation was struck by the patron on the very first day of session. We're not going to see that bill this session. I don't think you should expect to see it or see any more debate or discussion about that. Okay. Well, again, it didn't get proposed. It's not being proposed in the Senate, and I don't think it would pass the Senate if it came through. There's 4 other bills that are out there that we passed 3 of them earlier in the week, including one of my bills, and there's another bill we're going to vote on next week. One is the reinstatement of Virginia's 1 gun a month law, which was on the books for 19 years, from 1990. You know what, Bob? You can talk at the end. I'll let you ask questions. Just don't interrupt me. Okay? Okay. Well, Bob, you know what? I'm going to say what I'm going to say. You say a lot on Facebook. If everybody wants to go read what Bob has to say, you can read it on Facebook. We're going to have a civil meeting, and you can ask a question at the end, and then we'll hear what you have to say, and we'll answer your question. Okay, those are the rules. You got it?
You're right in the first place.
Okay, Bob, you got the rules?
You're right in the first
Bob, you have the rules. Can you follow the rules?
You're right in the first place.
Okay, great, Bob. Now, we had a law that was on the books in Virginia for 19 years. It was repealed in 2012. We've voted to put that rule back in place. The second bill that we passed is a universal background check. The original bill was introduced to apply to sales of guns, all sales, and transfers. In the Senate, we scoped it back. We got rid of transfers, so it only applies to sales. That is, if money trades hands in a gun transaction. That's the only thing it applies to. It does not apply to transfers. If you hand your gun to somebody while you're hunting, or if you hand your gun to somebody at firing range, that's out of the bill. The third bill we passed has to do with local authority. That was my legislation. We actually took about 6 members' bills and wrapped them together into one. And we passed the Senate, hasn't passed the House yet, it's been signed by the governor, but the Senate passed legislation giving local governments the authority to prohibit guns in buildings like where you're sitting right now. We gave local governments the authority to prohibit firearms in public parks that are owned by local government and in permanent events. Things like craft shows, farmers markets, or like protests like what happened in Charlottesville. The bill also repealed localities' prohibition on suing gun manufacturers or dealers for violating state or federal law, and it also said that if a locality does a gun buyback program, they no longer have to resell those guns. They're allowed to destroy them unless the owner wants the gun to be sold. And then the fourth law that's still pending that we have not passed, but we'll probably pass on Tuesday, it's called a red flag law, and that has to do with people who have made threats to kill lots of people or themselves. Right now, if a protective order is entered, if a husband or wife alleges violence against the other, a judge can enter an order throwing you out of your house, and you also have to surrender your weapons. That's the law today. Okay, so today, if you threaten to harm your spouse or somebody in your household or another person, like somebody in this room, the government will enter an order kicking you out of your house if you live in a household with somebody, and you have to surrender your gun. That's the law today. All we're doing is saying that if you threaten to kill yourself or a lot of people, the government can hold your gun instead of you giving it to a friend or a neighbor or putting it somewhere else out of your possession. That law we're going to vote on Tuesday.
I think there's some important provisions, though. I think
What's
there's
a what?
Well, right now it's just if you just.
Yes.
He
knows the people,
yeah.
And when they're mentally ill, it's not his first interview.
So if you give us a second, we'll talk about what the original bill is and what the posture is right now, because there are a lot of things that get introduced that don't have the appropriate mechanisms in place. That's what the legislative process is about. We have actually prosecutors as well as defense attorneys in our caucus as a member of the Senate that are highly skilled attorneys that have dealt with prosecution cases as well as defense cases. And so the Senate's very collegial. I mean, we talk about things we agree on and disagree on and work through the issues. The one thing that the substitute that's on the floor has not been adopted yet, but we've drafted up with a whole host of folks. We've given our Republican colleagues a couple more days to read to make sure that the provisions don't violate the Fourth Amendment, don't violate other issues, because we don't want illegal search and seizure. And so there's a process to do that in terms of having the order issued based on an investigation. That's also in the bill. So if there's a claim, there has to be investigation. The next step is the approval of that. In other words, there's a substantial enough information that a threat is credible or an issue is going on with the individual. That person's then delivered a court order to the home saying, turn over your weapons. Okay?
No.
No.
The bill is introduced has that.
No.
The bill that we're voting on Tuesday doesn't
Right.
have that anymore. Okay?
Why don't you? It makes sense to take the person out of the home.
Yes.
If they're that dangerous, why don't you take them into custody?
Yes.
And take them down to a mental facility? If
No,
they're
but
that
that's nice for
dangerous.
us.
No, that's
Or
nice
it's
for
more
them.
about just getting the
The
gun.
guns. It seems
Because
like
that's
it's
what the
just
point is.
No, because it's about the follow-up evaluation. Yeah, there's still a follow-up process from that. Okay?
Hey, folks, let's get through all our bills first, and then we can talk about emergency risk orders. We can talk about emergency risk orders at the end, okay? We can have a very focused discussion on it if you like. But we've had lots of discussions in caucus about it, both Democrats and Republicans trying to work together on a bill that everybody can agree on, or that at least gets a lot closer to a bill everybody can agree on.
Yeah, and so far, you know,
Okay.
universal background checks passed with bipartisan votes.
Yeah.
I mean, we do things to identify, and we take our colleagues' comments seriously. There's some smart people that involved that care about all the comments received. So we work through the various issues together.
Yeah, we also have to deal with redistricting this session. We have a constitutional amendment pending. There's many other proposals that are out there. We're voting on the authorization of casinos. There's legislation pending to allow 5 casinos in Virginia. Equal Rights Amendment was ratified about a week, well, we took the initial votes on it about a week ago. We still have to pass the bills through both chambers before that's final. We'll probably do that in the next 10 days is my suspicion. We have a lot of bills pending on improving voter access, including no excuse absentee voting. We also have a whole series of bills on energy and the environment. So a whole bunch of those. So those are some really big sort of macro issues. In terms of some of the bills that I'm carrying, again, you walked in, pick up the legislative agenda that I have. I'm going to start Senate Bill 106 under the environment. I have a bill to ban fracking east of I-95. Right now, there's about 40,000 acres that are under lease for hydraulic fracturing. Underneath, if you go east of I-95, everybody's in the same aquifer. If you take your water out of a well, you all suck out of the same aquifer. It's the drinking water source for about 4 million people. And these companies want to do fracturing, hydraulic fracturing, mining for natural gas right in the middle of it. And that would screw it up for everybody. So I have a bill to ban that. Senate Bill 629 is a bill to authorize what's called community solar gardens. The idea behind that is that you can partner with your neighbors to build a patch of solar panels away from your property, and then net the energy of those meters against your meters on your home. If you live in a neighborhood with a lot of tree cover, solar is not realistic for you, or if you live in a condominium or an apartment, you can't do it. You can't do solar because right now under state law, you can only net the energy from a panel if it's connected to your meter. But this would allow you to do solar if you live in one of those places where solar doesn't work. Next, on the next page, under Human Rights and Equity, I have legislation I've introduced to codify Roe v. Wade and Griswold v. Connecticut. I think with the latest addition to the Supreme Court of the United States, women's reproductive rights and rights to contraception are under threat. And we need to get that on the books of Virginia in case federal law changes. There's a case pending, which could change that. If you go to the next page, I've introduced legislation to reinstate Virginia's estate tax. Virginia had an estate tax from 1925 until 2007. We repealed it in 2007. I've always thought that was wrong. The estate tax that I've proposed would only apply to you if your net worth is more than $23 million. It applies to about 80 families a year, and it would generate about $40 million per year for taxpayers. It's supported on both, we have bills on both sides of the legislature to put that through. Senate Bill 72 would create a public defender's office in Prince William County, and Senator McPike has signed on to that along with every member of the Prince William delegation. That legislation passed the Senate Judiciary Committee last week. It'll be on the floor for a vote. The governor included in his budget. I'm fairly optimistic that'll happen. There are 25 public defender's offices in the state. Prince William County is the second largest jurisdiction in Virginia, still doesn't have one. And this would also cover Manassas Park, by the way. And I'm optimistic that will happen. Next, between the next two pages, Senate Bill 449, I've introduced legislation to repeal the death penalty. There are 2 people on death row in Virginia. We haven't seen a death sentence rendered in Virginia in, I think, at least 5 years, maybe as many as 8 years. Repealing the death penalty would save us about $3.9 million a year we spend on the Capitol Defender Service. I'm personally, I just think it's time we go there. The death penalty is just not something that's done in the Western world very much anymore. And I can get into that if anybody wants to. If you go to the next page, I have the civil justice reform. There's a whole series of things listed there. A lot of those are family law bills I've introduced. Family law is one of the areas of law that I practice. At the very end, though, I'd just like to note, I've introduced legislation yesterday that would authorize class action lawsuits in Virginia. Virginia is one of only 2 states in the entire United States of America where you cannot bring a class action lawsuit. And if you can't bring a class action lawsuit, that leaves it to corporations to be able to steal from people $5 at a time with zero consequence, because nobody ever brings a lawsuit over $5 or $10 or $20, even $100. To me, it's a remedy that we need to balance the playing field between consumers and corporations. Under transportation, I have legislation, Senate Bill 34, that would authorize temporary driving privileges to undocumented immigrants who can show they're paying their taxes, who can pass a driving test, and meet the other and prove they're a Virginia resident. That legislation has been adopted in 18 other states, including DC and Maryland. Right now, we have a lot of people that go to Maryland and they lie about their address to get a driving permit card. When I talk to the Latino community, it's the #1 issue in the immigrant community. My district is 23% Latino. I think Jeremy's is 20 to 25%. We have a lot of people who need to have that benefit. If they're here, I think the state ought to encourage them to pay their taxes, get auto insurance. You can ask them, when we do questions, you can ask a question. I think it's time for that. Senate Bill 160, right under that, would prohibit anybody driving a car from having a phone in your hand. That legislation passed the Senate last year 36 to 4. But the Senate Courts Chairman didn't like it, boxed it up in a conference committee. It didn't pass, but it's widely supported legislation and adopted in over 25 other states of the country. Accidents and deaths on the road are going up for the first time in 50 years over the last 3 years. I think a lot of it's because everybody's driving around with a phone in their hand. Then you go to the next page under consumer protection. I've got 3 bills pending to reform predatory lending. Right now, in Virginia, it's debatable, but some people think it's legal to make loans at over 400% interest rates. There are people doing that with these personal individual lines of credit. Some of them are doing it through Indian tribes and using tribal sovereignty to drag Virginians into litigation or actually arbitration in Indian tribes in Michigan, Nevada, other states. I have legislation that would prohibit that or help to stop that. There's also an omnibus predatory lending bill being carried by our caucus chairman that I'm the chief co-sponsor of. Right now, out on Route 1, you'll see Title Max, Loan Max, all those guys out there. They legally make loans under state law at interest rates of up to 267%. About 15,000 cars got repossessed in Virginia last year by those people. Over 100,000 people use those loans at triple-digit interest rates. I think we need to reform that area, bring everybody back down to 36%, like a lot of other states have done. Senate Bill 641 provide regulation for people who sell your data, information about you. There are companies out there that gather your data about you, about your purchasing habits, your behavior, and then they sell it. A lot of times the data they sell is inaccurate, and then that creates problems for you when you're trying to buy something or maybe rent a property or you're trying to get a job. My bill would require anybody who keeps data on you and sells it to give you a copy of the data upon request. Right now, not everybody's required to do that. It would also say that they can't sell data about children. And it would also say that if they don't give you your data, or if they keep inaccurate data, you could sue them for money. And right now you can do that for some people, but there's a very large classification of data brokers where you can't do it for, and this would bring them in. Then on the next page, Go Virginia grants. About 3 years ago, we set up a program where the state gives out grants to new businesses. However, a lot of that money's been going to places like Tyson's and Reston. I would like to see it go to places that don't have as many jobs, like the Route 1 corridor or Manassas. We designate these things called opportunity zones, where you can make investments and not pay taxes depending on how you got the money there. I would like to see. So, anyways, my bill says that they have to spend a quarter of that money in those opportunity zones, many of which are on Route 1 and in Manassas. Then, one of my budget amendments I didn't mention, I just want to mention really quick, which is right there at the end, is the U.S. Army Museum. The governor's budget included a $5 million grant for the United States Army Museum. The Army Museum is going to be located on Fort Belvoir. It's a $120 million museum. It's going to attract over 800,000 visitors a year. And I think between the U.S. Army Museum, the Marine Corps Museum, and George Washington's Mount Vernon, it'll do a lot to generate a lot more tourism impact down here, military tourism. People will come to see those two military museums in Mount Vernon, and they will stay in Prince William, or they'll stay in southern Fairfax County. And tourists are great because tourists come down here. You don't have to pay for schools. You don't have to pay for they just come down here and spend their money. And so we really need to get that Army Museum. We're supposed to cut the ribbon in June, but they're still about $30 million, $20 to $30 million short in their fundraising. This will help fund that gap. And I was excited the governor funded that. We need to make sure we keep that in the budget. So that's some of the things in my legislative agenda. I don't know if Jeremy has anything else he wants to say. We can start taking questions.
So one of the big things that I think we're going to make significant progress this year is on access to voting and no excuse absentee voting. I think that's significantly important for our area. We have longer commute times than almost any place in the universe, it feels like. And so opening up that access, no excuses. If you want to participate in democracy with the communities we have, sign up, go, fill your paperwork, and cast your ballot. I know that's been a frustration for many for years. Although the Prince William and Manassas area absentee voting numbers have been increasing, I think there's a lot more folks that we know that don't participate, and we want to remove those obstacles to casting a vote. Also coming up is redistricting. And redistricting, we have a pending constitutional amendment to provide a framework around which drawing our boundaries, as Senator Surovell was describing his Senate district, right? Side of his is across, 2 blocks beyond Route 1 and north of here. Mine's south of here, but only west of Route 1, except for a couple blocks. And then, all these sort of lines sort of squiggle through communities.
You have to have a vote to stay in my district.
Yeah, you got to puddle jump a couple times for his district. But the reason why a lot of lines have been done is we now have computers that can draw hyper-partisan lines.
By the way, we didn't do it. We had nothing to do with the current lines.
But the sophistication's out there. It wasn't like in Jefferson's and Madison days where you had a map and a sort of a pencil and you sort of drew lines around towns. This is like GIS, highly sophisticated. Picking out we would like her in this district and sort of weaving through districts. And so there's got to be a better framework that allows a more fair process. There's a constitutional amendment we have to pass this year to get it on the books. One of our big debates is going to be the criteria bill. In other words, the criteria in which the rules of how that will be governed and operate. It gets fairly complicated because you have rules like contiguous counties or cities. Well, across Virginia, if you think about it historically, counties were drawn based on a horse ride to the courthouse. Those don't always represent the same communities of interest in terms of whether it be commuting patterns, other different factors. So there's all sorts of very important interests, minority communities, economic communities. You've got a district, I've got a district that have some very wealthy parts and some very poor, disadvantaged parts and poor parts that are, quarter mile apart or less. So sometimes it's right across the street. And so there's all sorts of ways to draw lines, and it is not a simple process. There's lots of different ways all across the United States are done, but that's going to be still a significant debate to come to hopefully set for this next census and redistricting process in 2021. So we don't know what all the solution is yet. We're still working through what that looks like, but those are some significant other big issues that are going on. Again, all in the next, we have like 50 days left. So a lot of these are fairly significant issues, as you can imagine. And just to expand on gaming and casinos, I'm chairing the subcommittee in general laws that is taking all of what's proposed right now. So there's both casinos in 5 different locations, there's online sports betting, there are the what to do about the gray machines, and the gray machines are the new video machines you see in restaurants and gas stations. They've popped up all across Prince William. They sort of found a hole in the a little corner in the gas station and have 3 or 4 machines now. Those are money. Those are payout machines. But they're not regulated. All those machines you see are not regulated. They're not taxed. There's no guarantee on payout rates. There's no independent verification on those machines. Yeah, lottery sales are getting hit at the same time because of it. We lost, 60 million, 70 million right now in terms of declining revenue. So there's all sorts of factors we've got to figure out. I appreciate any feedback, any thoughts on that, since I'll be probably scheduling our first subcommittee next week to start to dissect all of the issues and what do we do about it? Do we create a regulatory framework? How do we address it? How do we deal if casinos move forward? How do we regulate it? And then online sports betting. A lot of states are introducing that based on the court decisions. And so lots of moving parts again. So no lofty issues. It's all easy riding in Richmond right now. Nothing to talk about or see. But we appreciate your feedback. So what's that? I think open it up to questions if that works. We're about 45 minutes in, so here and then here.
I've prepared some statements, and I beg your indulgence to let me read it. Okay. Gentlemen, I'm a volunteer for One Virginia 2021, working to end gerrymandering in Virginia. I think we can all agree that the system we have been using to delineate voting districts is not working to the advantage of the voters and needs to be changed. Last year's passage of SB 306, an amendment to the Constitution of Virginia to set up a map drawing commission independent of the legislature, is a testament to that understanding. Now we are at the point where that draft amendment needs to be passed one more time before it can go on the ballot for voters to decide, and the waters have become decidedly choppier. Some have voiced concerns that this amendment is not the best way to get the desired reform. Let me tell you why I think it is. First, there is the idea that we don't need an amendment. Reform can be achieved by statutory legislation. If we don't amend the Constitution, any commission set up by statute would only be advisory in nature. The legislature would not be bound to enact its recommendations as it would be for a commission set up through the Constitution, and we would revert to the status quo, see not working above. Also, any legislation can be repealed by subsequent legislatures whenever the majority changes hands. This raises the specter of mid-decade redistricting efforts, possibly with every new election. Currently, the Constitution only says redistricting must happen in years ending with a 1. It does not prohibit redistricting in years 2 through 0. Another objection to the amendment has been the provision that if the commission fails to produce maps that its members can agree on or that the General Assembly will approve, the matter moves to the Supreme Court. Well, guess where the maps go now if one party passes maps the other doesn't like? The minority sues, the suit works its way up the ladder of appeals, and ends up in the Supreme Court anyway. Additionally, legislation has been introduced this year that would provide guidelines for the court, requiring it to appoint a special master to draw the maps and to follow standards and criteria established by the General Assembly. Those standards and criteria are contained in another bill introduced this year. It outlines the makeup of the commission and how its members would be selected, stressing the need for racial, ethnic, geographic, and gender diversity. It provides for public participation in the whole endeavor, with public hearings and easy access to information about the process. It would also require the maps to be drawn to give racial and language minorities an equal opportunity to participate, and prohibit maps that would favor or disfavor any political party, incumbent legislator, or member of Congress, or other individual or entity. These measures are awaiting your consideration. Y'all have got a copy of my remarks, and the numbers are in there. I'm not going to bore the people with that. I urge you to support all of them. I've attached a couple of information pieces that I hope will clarify the issue for you. Gentlemen, we all want the best reform we can get. This amendment and its accompanying enabling legislation is the way to do it, and the time to do it is now. The people of Virginia really want this. Please, give them a chance to vote for it in November. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Back to transportation.
I think we've responded a little bit. You could respond to it. I've been working on this issue as the Northern Virginia chair back in almost 10 years ago when the Northern Virginia 2021 was formed. It's been a long road. We're very close. We're trying to get the rest of the folks on board with something that everyone can agree on. It's not easy, so.
Yeah, and Lucia, I appreciate you came to see me, I think, in Richmond about this, and we've talked about it a couple times. I don't like the current amendment. I've told you that. I voted for it last year because it was the only thing we had in town. It was given to us. We had very little time to actually look at it when it came out. It came out the last day or two of session. What I don't like about it is it does not have the criteria that the commission is required to follow in the constitutional amendment. So the criteria is passed by the legislature. And while this legislature might adopt one criteria, if the legislature flips, another legislature can come in and adopt criteria it likes and direct the commission to gerrymander a different way. And so I just feel like we're transmitting the gerrymandering from one body to another body, still subject to our control. And I would like to see the criteria actually in the amendment. And I mean, the criteria, I think a lot of this stuff can be done by computer today. There are people that have developed formulas that can mathematically determine compactness or contiguity, or mathematically determine to minimize the amount of votes that get wasted. Right now, if you over gerrymander a district, a lot of people's votes get wasted because they compact a lot of Democrats into some districts and a lot of Republicans into others, and so there's a lot of people whose votes end up being wasted because they're Republicans in Democratic districts or Democrats are in Republican districts, and they end up overvoting in places. And so there's formulas we can do where computers can just figure all this stuff out and take people out of the mix. I don't think you can take people completely out of the mix because of some of the things Senator McPike just mentioned, but I think you can very significantly restrict how much discretion people have in terms of making tweaks after a computer has drawn a map. And I'd much rather see an amendment that does something like that rather than what we have right now, which is, from my perspective, extremely open-ended. There's also zero provisions in the constitutional amendment for either racial diversity, which is a big issue in our state, which is going to become a majority-minority state probably in the next 20 years. There's also no guarantees of regional diversity. So if another legislature were to take over, we could see a body that's made up entirely of downstate people because there's no actual guarantee that there's going to be people from all over the state in there. There is obviously minority representation, and so you might hope that some of the minority party might put people in from some underrepresented regions, but I just think there's a lot of things that weren't fully thought through. Also, the last thing is the way the constitutional amendment works is that the minority party can simply kill any plan it wants by taking 2 votes, 2 delegates, 2 senators, and there's 2 members of the minority House of Delegates in there, there's 2 members of the minority Senate in there. So if for example, the Republicans in this one coming up, if the 2 Republican appointees in the House decide they just want to throw it to the Supreme Court, they can just say no to everything, and then the Supreme Court draws the map. And our Supreme Court today was appointed largely by Republican majorities over the last 20 years. The legislature elects our judges in the Supreme Court. We have a Republican state senator's sister on the Supreme Court, a former Republican state senator, 2 other guys who I've had to argue with who basically are very conservative, and then the Chief Justice, who was also a Republican pick. And so from my point of view, the Supreme Court is not exactly the fairest place to be right now when it comes to political issues. And the system worries me. So I'd like to see us do something by statute, do another constitutional amendment for next year and pass it after that. And that's kind of where I am right now. I'm not totally opposed, but I just see a lot of problems that I have a lot of concern about that haven't been fixed. You want to go?
Back to transportation, and then I have 2 yes or no questions, if I can do 3 at once.
Can you speak up for a second? Oh, we'll just repeat your question.
Long Bridge,
Yeah.
great idea, we need that to fix. Great that you finally have the funding available, but is anything being done about the railroad crossing over Route 1 north of the Occoquan?
Yeah.
Have a great long bridge, but you still got a bottleneck
Yeah.
over the Occoquan.
Yeah.
What is being done to fix that? Because that is really what's inhibiting expansion of the area.
I'm not sure about that segment. The entire stretch for the Long Bridge includes the entire corridor. Some places will be additional tracks, 3, 4. I'm not sure about the bridge section
Yeah.
for that specific part itself.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
so
haven't seen
see,
anything
This is when it's great
anywhere
to
in
have him
any of
because
the
it's in his
details.
district, not mine.
I haven't seen anything
Okay.
anywhere in any of the
Okay,
details
I
that
got an
address
answer
that
for you.
bridge.
So, did everybody hear the question?
No.
Okay. She says that Long Bridge is great, but that there's the bridge over the Occoquan River, the rail bridge over the Occoquan River would also need to be expanded. She wanted to know what the plans were on that. So that's the exact same question I asked the Secretary of Transportation on Tuesday when she was in my office. I said I didn't understand I said I thought that'd be kind of an expensive bridge too, and was that included? And she said no. So basically the plan right now is, first of all, they've been building out a third rail from Fredericksburg north, and if you cross any of the rail crossings, you'll probably have seen that they're building a third rail at all the road crossings. But on all the creek crossings, they've not built new bridges. And there's not a plan right now to build new bridges at the same time Long Bridge is done. But they're going to build the bridges over time as they get the money to do that. Those bottlenecks are much less of a problem than the Long Bridge. Right now the Long Bridge is only 2 rails, it needs to be 4. Because remember at Long Bridge, it's not only accepting the rails from the old RF&P track that we're on down here, but also the track in from Manassas. And so the Long Bridge is really the big problem. And they're going to start prioritizing the other bridges after that. And so, you were thinking the same thing I was when
So the big
it came
answer
out.
is no. The big answer is no.
There's not money to fix it. Again, we need money, and as I said earlier at the beginning of this, we don't have nearly enough money for all the things we need to do. And these projects are very expensive. So, but they're definitely aware of it. It's just a question of prioritization. Okay? What was your second question?
Can I have 2 yes or no questions, and really just yes or no? And they relate to the gun legislation. On transfers, does that impact gift? If I permanently gift a gun to a relative, does that require a universal background check?
Under the law the Senate passed, no.
Okay.
Under the law that was originally proposed, there was an exemption for family transfers or guns that were passed down by wills. But that, because we took transfers out of the bill, is not an issue anymore.
Okay.
The legislation pending in the House includes transfers. And I don't know what the House is going to pass, but the Senate will not pass transfers.
Okay. And then the public events, the jurisdiction on limiting guns at public events, does that impact people with concealed carry permits? Or is that just open carry at public events?
Okay. Everybody hear her question? No. She wanted to know if the authority the bill we passed giving local governments the authority to regulate firearms at public events, whether that impacted concealed carry holders. Okay? And the answer to that is maybe. It's not yes or no. My answer to that is it would depend on what the local government ordinance passes. And so at the events, it would be a permit by permit analysis. So for example, at the Occoquan Craft Fair, if the Occoquan Town Council chooses to prohibit concealed carry, they could do so, or they could say the concealed carry is okay. But whatever they do, they have to post a sign outside of the event describing what they've done. So you either have to post a sign saying no firearms permitted past this point, or they could pass one that's saying no open carry past this point, concealed carry okay. But they have to give the public notice, both in the process and on the signage at the event, what they're doing.
There was a
More
question
questions, but I'll
back first.
pass.
We have a follow-up on Facebook for that, so.
Okay.
All right.
There's a follow-up on Facebook real quick?
Yeah, so we have a follow-up question to that from a constituent who would have probably been at the Whitman Town Hall, Tessa Elsmeyer. She says, why are you trying to create a mismatch of laws throughout the localities in Virginia? Which I think what she's getting at is,
Yeah.
why let localities decide this instead of deciding it at the state level?
Okay. By the way, we should have mentioned this at the beginning. Philip Scranage is my chief of staff, and Marina Pugh is my legislative aide. They're on my staff, who's here today, and Jeremy, he might have staff here.
David Powell is in the back, my
Yeah.
chief of staff. He's
Yeah.
also here and available.
Yeah. So this is my bill, so I'll answer the question. If you go to the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries website, they have a publication they put out every year that has a summary of local firearm ordinances. There are currently 86 variations of local firearm ordinances in the Commonwealth of Virginia between about 60 or 66 jurisdictions. I can't remember which. If you need a citation for that document, I'm happy to give it to you, but it basically lists each jurisdiction and the local firearm ordinances that they passed in that jurisdiction based on authority that we've already given them. The biggest one is that we currently allow authorities to regulate whether or not people can carry loaded rifles or shotguns in their vehicles. Most jurisdictions, at least up here, prohibit that. I don't think Prince William's actually passed that ordinance, but I think Manassas and Manassas Park, I think, has. But in any event, we already have a lot of local firearm ordinances, mainly related to hunting and the carriage of firearms. So from my point of view, the way people view these issues are very different in the state. In Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria, the stats I saw say that about 2.1% of people have concealed weapon permits. Prince William, I think it's closer to about 6%. Out in the Shenandoah Valley, it's 25%. Okay? Down in Southwest Virginia, they're all north of 20%. And so, given that we have extreme variation, right? We have variation, I mean 10 times the proportion of population is our firearm owners in some parts of the state versus others. I think it's important we recognize that in terms of the local authority, the authority we give our localities to regulate firearms. And that's the best way I can answer Tessa's question.
In the back? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if y'all can see this is my military ID. Because of this guy, I've had to have a military ID for about 30 years. And the reason I bring up my military ID is because I understand that ID for voting has currently we have to show a valid ID to vote. And I understand that's one thing that's on the table is removing that requirement. You were talking about voter access. I'm sure it wasn't intended this way, but personally, I take it as a slap in the face that I have to have an ID for, I don't know, gaining access to military installations, going to a military, going to doctor's appointments, eye appointments, dental appointments, picking up prescriptions. About the only thing I don't need an ID for, at least under this particular, as I understand, now correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand that's on the table to take away IDs for voting. Just how would you address that? Personally, I think it's wrong, but change my mind.
So the answer is yes. There is a proposal to remove the voter ID law because, frankly, across Virginia history, there are some people that were not ever given birth certificates because you had to check whether you're white or whether you're black.
That's history,
Okay?
as I
No,
understand it.
let me answer. There are still folks who do not and did not. If you are Native American, there was no box for you. You were not issued a birth certificate. There are still people alive that do not have official documentation and birth certificate stuff. So there's a long history of different things of folks that were never given. Now there's provisions to go and fill out your address to the voter ID at the local registrar's office.
Great, yes.
But the whole idea has been voter suppression and increasing barriers, and the actual incident of voter fraud is like nil.
Zero.
There's been zilch on this.
Let me-
It was an artificial barrier that's been thrown up, and I don't know how many times I've seen a commuter in this area rush in at the last second, and then they forgot their ID in their car. I've actually seen people denied access to vote because they were going in at 6:55 because they're caught traffic, gone in, they went in, and then they're rejected because they didn't have their ID. I mean, I have a problem with that. I do, because they've been coming there every single year. I've witnessed this. I've been at poll for the last, 10 years straight. Every hour that the polls are open, and it happens.
Let me clarify a little bit. First of all, we're not removing the voter ID requirement, okay?
That makes me feel better.
We're taking the law back to where it was pre, I think, 2014 or 13. And what that law said was that to vote, when you get there, you have to show an ID. And if you don't have a government-issued photo ID, then you have to sign an affidavit certifying under penalty of felony prosecution that you are the person you say you are. But you do have to show an ID. You do have to show an ID initially to vote. And then if you don't, then you have to get to the affidavit. Now, to add on a little bit of what Jeremy said, or Senator McPike said, I practice criminal defense law. I go to a courthouse building every day where I see probably, in Fairfax County, we've got 5 courtrooms running traffic about between 150 and 200 cases a day. I see about 10 people per courtroom surrender their license to the court while standing in that room every single day. It happens down in juvenile court, it happens on circuit court too. I don't see how many up there. But there's typically about 800,000 Virginians whose right to drive is suspended. And if it's suspended in a courtroom, they surrender. If a cop gets their license on the street, they take it. And I don't think your ability to vote should be dependent on whether you had a traffic ticket that day or within the last week, or whether you saw a police officer in the last 2 weeks and your license was suspended. You're one of those 800,000 people, which, by the way, is about 10% of the population of the Commonwealth. I also represent a monastery. There are 30 nuns who live in my district. They don't wear shoes. I don't think they have licenses. I've knocked the doors of I knocked the door of a woman who was over 100 years old. She registered to vote so she could vote for President Obama. She didn't have a license because I don't think she drives. I knocked the door of another woman who was 96 years old who didn't drive. I'm pretty sure she didn't have a license anymore. So there are people out there. There are people out. Well, these people don't go out that much anymore, and they shouldn't be denied their right to vote simply because of their physical limitations, because of how they choose to live their life. And that's why we have the affidavit requirement for them. And I don't think there's a whole lot of people that go out there and commit a felony to cast one vote in an election. Voter fraud is something that's typically done when you're trying to get a whole bunch of votes cast, not one person at a time. And so from my perspective, the risk of somebody breaking the law is very low, and it hasn't been documented that really hardly ever occur. And so to me, there's not a lot of risk there. That's where I stand. So,
One more thing, Jim, if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
I've read that there's a proposal on the table. I've read there's a proposal to strike the requirement for state inspection. We already know that we've got ridiculously congested thoroughfares in this area. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I'll qualify this as speaking that as a daughter of a mechanic, wife of a mechanic. I have my own crew chief. Everybody doesn't have that. So what bothers me is the notion that you're going to add to the already ridiculously dangerous situations on our highways on the best days, the possibility of what I call wrecks waiting to happen, people driving around on McPike tires, broken belts, lights, brakes, etc. Now, I think, personally, some people don't believe that we should have a government mandate to make us take care of our cars and keep them in running order. However, on the other end of that, if you didn't have somebody standing over you saying, get this done, it's not going to get done. Next thing I know, bam, somebody hits me in the back.
Yeah,
On the highway.
I'm not a fan of that proposal.
Neither am I.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, there's a discussion as to whether, because we'll have it in committee, it's in transportation, so it'll become before our committee. There's a discussion if you don't do that, do you go to 2 years? I wouldn't be comfortable with anything less than 2 years, or one. Maybe it aligns with our emissions or something, but I don't want it to go away. I mean, that's definitely my base. There's too many things that happen on the road that people don't see, they don't realize. People are not, I like to tinker still on cars, but I know a lot of people that don't and realize what else is going on with the car, that clackety sound or that screeching sound when they're driving down the road.
You and I would see that coming from Dale City to Alexandria.
Yeah, exactly.
And we don't need to exacerbate the already bad problems.
I actually had questions
I'm
further
sorry,
back
real quick,
when
I'm
he was
sorry.
speaking.
Right?
Okay.
I actually had questions all the way back when he was still speaking that I've never been called on.
Is that a follow-up?
Are you following up?
Yeah, these are new.
Okay,
Let's do Brian and you.
She had her hand up.
Okay.
The sequence was here, 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 then you, okay?
Right. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm here, I'm Bonnie, hi, how are you?
Yeah, try to speak up so everybody can
There
hear
you
you.
go, okay. So I'm here representing VAFP, Virginia's for Parks, as one of my hats, retired VEA members for schools, and I'm also a member of Voice. And I want to thank you for working with Voice, which is an interfaith group that is for pre-K and also school counselors, and thank you for working with them, Scott. Appreciate that. The VAFP this year has, as always, we're bringing forward Valors again. Valors is being sponsored by Senator Deeds, and then co-sponsored in the House by Kilgore for a budget amendment to the governor's budget. And we are hoping that we can get this finally passed this year after 20 years. Valors, for those of you that are not here, is a Virginia retirement system for law enforcement officers. Most law enforcement officers in Virginia have a special retirement because they have hazardous duty, but state parks were left out of that. And we have just heard through talking through some other people in Richmond that even at the DMV, the officers that work at the DMV do not have Valors.
Okay.
So those are two things that are going to be coming up, and I hope you will consider.
Bonnie, I represent more state parks than anybody in
I know
the
you
entire
do.
legislature.
Three.
I have three, and the law enforcement out there have to carry a gun, and they have to deal with law enforcement situations, make arrests like everybody else. And I think they should have the same retirement benefits as a regular police officer. So I'll fight with you on that.
Also, the Youth Conservation Corps needs funding. It's a wonderful opportunity for the youth. It's like the old YCC for underprivileged youth to come into the parks, work in the parks in the summer, learn valuable skills, life skills. And I believe Senator Hanger is one of the sponsors of that bill, and I hope you will support that one also.
Okay.
And schools, of course, they need to be funded. And I appreciate all the work that you do for the children in the Commonwealth and for the citizens. And I just wanted to say thank you for your service.
Thanks, Bonnie. No.
Sir?
Okay. I actually have quite a couple different questions. My name is Ryan Shear. So my first question has to do with, I believe you spoke of personal data and how you want to have a requirement for them to send you some piece of information every time they choose to sell it,
No.
or something of that nature?
No. If anybody keeps data about you that they sell to any third parties, they're required to provide you a copy of that data when you make a request to them that you want to see it.
So that doesn't prevent any sort of selling of data. And that is
Right.
where I'd like to actually see that go, because now I'm actually a volunteer EMT with Prince William County. HIPAA actually states from a medical perspective that any personal identifiable information at all cannot be given to anybody
Right.
unless it's of value to the care of the patient.
Right.
Why is it okay for companies, because let's just face it, a hospital is nothing more than a company, okay? At the end of the day, I give my information to some company because I want a product that they are providing. A product that a hospital is providing is nothing more than me having to rightfully give my information to them for them to provide me a product of caring for my body. Why is data that I give some other company able to be treated any differently? I think HIPAA should actually be the standard, and we should never be transferring data or selling data at all. Why are we not going that direction with personally if I work for a company as a manager, I'm not allowed to transfer information or bring in another employee and talk about another employee
Right.
with that. This is just
Yeah, listen,
crazy.
I mostly agree with you about that. The problem is we need a federal standard. It's really something HIPAA is federal, and we need a federal standard on this. In Europe, they just adopted, the EU just adopted some very comprehensive regulations, which is why you've seen these boxes pop up on websites a lot saying you consent to cookies and all this stuff. We need a federal standard. Trying to pass something that comprehensive at the state level would be very hard. California just passed the most comprehensive data standard law in the country, And a lot of people are conforming to the California standard, but because we're not California residents, we don't have the same rights as Californians as citizens. So I tried to bite off a little tiny piece of it that I thought everybody could at least hopefully agree on. But I'm already getting blowback. I've already had, LexisNexis and Microsoft and Amazon come in and yell at me about how, I'm going to screw everything up and make us not business friendly. But I'm hoping that we can at least agree that if they're going to sell your data, they at least got to show you what they're selling and or be sued about it. And they're at least going to agree to provide accurate data and not inaccurate data. Because I cannot tell you how many people I've had to represent in court who've had inaccurate data sold. I represented a guy a couple of years ago who was on, according to 1, 2, 3 companies, was on 3 sex offender registries. And his wife, he had never been convicted of anything, and he couldn't figure out why he couldn't rent a property. But every time he tried to rent something, nobody would call him back. And he finally asked, well, of course, being on a sex offender registry, you must know. And he was like, what? So, there's stuff like that happens out there that people need to have more rights about. You had another question?
I have a couple. So, I guess I want to also understand what you were speaking about with respect to casinos and whether you were saying you wanted to allow more casinos in the state or something like that.
Sort of. He's on the committee that's in charge of all that. What I said is there's legislation pending to authorize 5 casinos. We have to decide whether it's going to be 0, 1, 3, 5. We have to decide what kind of system we're going to have. There's like about 20 policy choices in there we have to figure out. He's going to be right in the middle of it.
I have about 10 days to frame all of the various policy choices, so I'm not going to get that much sleep the next week. There's legislation last year that authorized 5 locations pending us renewing the legislation this year. And so there's 2 in the Hampton Roads area, so Norfolk and Portsmouth, Richmond, and then Danville and Bristol. Those are the locations that would be what we call level 3, which would have the table games as well as slot machine. So everyone's got sort of that picture. So yes, that's in consideration. We don't have the regulatory framework. We need to establish that by law if it's going to move forward. I don't know where the votes are on that yet in committee and in both chambers yet, depending on what is proposed. So it's a lot of policy consideration in addition to the
So you're saying that the 5 locations are already in existence?
They are authorized and pending us renewing another location based on a law that was passed last year.
These are the localities.
So we do a study. We sent it through our joint legislative audit and review commission study, JLARC study, that looked at the issue. They published a report in November highlighting recommendations, revenue, projection, taxation rates, other policy questions. So we didn't want to pass something without having a framework of independent review. That's been done. Now the question is how many of those policy recommendations are going to make it into law.
There's 5 localities that have expressed interest in having casinos.
Yeah, they pursued it.
And the bill, at least I think the bill we passed last time, the bill we're likely to pass, would say that those localities could only have a casino if they did a referendum saying that they wanted it. I believe 1 or 2 localities might have already passed the referendum, but in any event, that's why it was those 5. And the JLARC report he mentioned, JLARC is like our like GAO, or I don't know what the federal equivalent is, but it's like they do really big studies, and we make them do like 4 or 5 a year. And last year one of them was casinos. They gave us like a 300-page report about the feasibility of casinos and how much revenue it was likely to generate. And they decided that basically if we do the 5 locations and we pick a tax structure that's kind of in the middle, it would generate about $150 million a year for taxpayers. If we did one in Northern Virginia, they said it would generate another $160 million. But nobody in Northern Virginia has asked for one. But that's the information we're operating on. No, we haven't passed anything yet. There's a whole lot of stuff we have to decide about it.
So I guess now my question surrounding that is, we all know about Vegas, Nevada, and what is the name for Vegas, Nevada commonly? Sin City, right? So I guess what I really want to know is the connectivity between all the different things that you guys are proposing. So you guys want to take away any ability for somebody overall to protect themselves from a gun rights perspective, but yet you want to bring in things that are going to cause havoc. And why is that? Is that because you guys are looking primarily and only at revenue, and that's what you want for the state? Like, what is your major concern? Do you ever take a look at all the connecting, like the connectivities between the issues and the bills that you're proposing? Because to me, those are complete opposites of one another. You want to bring in, quote unquote, sin, but you want to get away from anybody having an ability to protect themselves.
Yeah, part of that requirement was a part of last year's debate and the continuing debate. And so the minimum requirement is $200 million in terms of investment in that legislation. So the idea, and obviously the impact and the review of the proposals by the locality and the review and approval process has got to be significant investment. So it's just not like a shandy hole with a couple slots and a couple people run around. So there are those connectivity issues in terms of public safety, the investment in the development. And I think that's a part of the JLARC report's recommendations is how can you scale investment? Tax rate impacts the amount of investment. The various game types and skills that you are allowed also impacts that. So there's sort of a sliding scale of economic value and I think interest of whether or not you have sort of resort style, which is hotel, casino, complex sort of development. Maybe not to the scale of MGM for Bristow and Danville, but appropriate size to the economy scale of what the surrounding region and visitors would support. The same thing is happening across in Tennessee and Kentucky in terms of gaming and potential for gaming, and so they're sort of trying to be the first for that region, and that would create roughly 1,000 jobs. 1,000 jobs is a big deal to Bristol, okay? The city managers come and say, we want these jobs. The city councils come and say, we want these jobs. This is important. We could draw revenue from multiple states. And so, I think they as a community, through referendum, again, they have to pass it through the voters, also have to have this debate at a local community level before it would move forward. So I'm not sure there's any one solution, but they've got to evaluate everything in the context for that community.
Can I say, I don't think the casino issue is a partisan issue. There's disagreement in both caucuses about what it ought to be. And from my point of view.
And support both caucuses from different aspects.
Right.
So.
I mean, it's mostly, the Bristol effort is coming out of the most conservative, Second Amendment friendly part of the state. Okay? Same thing with the Danville casino effort. So, those people down there want the job. I live, a little bit north of here, but I can walk out my door 10 minutes and stand up on my tiptoes and I can see the MGM casino across the river. That thing is sucking $150 million of Virginia money a year across the river to pay for their schools, right? We are paying for Maryland schools. We also see a lot of that going over to Charlestown, West Virginia, Charlestown slots, and the Charlestown casino facility. There's nothing in North Carolina, but they're coming in Kentucky and Tennessee. And it's important that we get these things. If we're going to get them, instead of just sending our money out, I'd rather have the people spend their money here if they want to gamble and us benefit from it, rather than us fund the effort in other states. And that's where I come at gambling. And also in sports betting, that's something that's going to happen whether we like it or not. The Supreme Court last year decided a decision that said states now have the authority to regulate sports gambling. It was originally prohibited by federal law until the Supreme Court said that was illegal. And so that's going to happen. Other states are going to do it again. If people are going to do it, I think our taxpayers should benefit from it. That's where I come from. In terms of, I don't think, in terms of the Second Amendment stuff, I don't see any of the things we're doing as inhibiting people's ability to defend themselves. And I know people disagree with me about that. We're not taking away anybody's guns, right? All we're doing is reinstituting one gun a month, so you can buy 12 guns, and it's only handguns, by the way. So you can only buy 12 handguns here. You can buy as many rifles or shotguns as you want, anytime you like. The local authority bill is only public buildings, events, and parks. That's it. Some people want to give local governments complete authority over firearms. I didn't support that. I'm not sure Jeremy doesn't support that. The universal background check, all that's an effort to stop these illegal gun transactions. Right now, if you have a domestic assault conviction, you can't pass a background check, but you can go to your neighbor and buy his gun. You can go on Craigslist and buy a gun. You can go to a gun show and go to the private sale area and buy a gun. I think we need to shut that down.
So what is your plan for enforcement of that, though? So just as,
you want to know how it works, how it's going to work?
Yeah, how are you going to enforce
How it works is if you want to sell a gun to somebody, you're going to have to go to a local gun shop or go to a state police and ask them to run the background check. They give you a piece of paper and say you got a green light, and then you can sell the gun. That's the way it's done in a lot of states. That's the enforcement.
I think his question was, if someone doesn't do that, how, like the police, how are people going to become aware that the law is being violated?
My suspicion is the only time it's going to come up is if a gun is used in a crime, and then they go back and try and trace the gun. Then they discover that there was an illegal transaction, and then there's a prosecution. That's my suspicion.
So it would be a responsive, not a proactive.
But
It would be more of a responsive after it occurred.
Yeah,
that's my suspicion.
Yeah, we debated on the floor the other day. The alternative is to do a gun registry, and we're
Nobody
not
wants to
interested.
do that.
No one wants to do that,
Yeah.
right? Because then you say, okay, this is from A to B.
Yeah.
We have to have transfer and proof of it, right? We're not interested in creating a gun registry. I mean, bipartisan, like, we're just not interested in going there. And so that's sort of the counter to it. So yes, you could do more stringent enforcement, but I think you're giving up way too much in that trade-off. And
But the House bill has the transfer in it, which would require.
Well, the transfer will not pass the Senate.
It won't pass the
If
Senate.
they're conditioned, if the House will only pass the bill with the transfer in it, then it isn't going to happen.
so there's a question, the gentleman in the back, just behind you.
One of them has to do with the universal background checks. As far as the transfers go, if I'm going hunting out west and I need a elk rifle to do that, my
What
neighbor
rifle?
has one. Can I borrow it from him, go out west and do that? Is that a transfer, or the fact that he will not be with me? Did you follow?
Well-
Are you talking about temporary transfers? We're
Yeah,
sitting right next to each other.
So that would be a transfer. There's a series of, in the bill that was proposed, there was a series of exceptions. And one of the exceptions was if a transfer occurs while the continuous presence of the owner of the gun, then it's okay. And the concern that some members raised was that, take that scenario, say you go out hunting with your friends with a series of shotguns, and you all go in different directions. Are you still in each other's continuous presence, or did 3 people just commit a felony? Right? And so there's a lot of scenarios that are hard to imagine, and a lot of people thought there were too many scenarios to get transfers into the mix, so we took it out. So right now, in the Senate bill, transfers are not in the bill. In the House bill, which has not been debated, discussed, or voted on yet, it's still in. But a transfer bill will not pass the Senate because of all the potential problems like you just identified.
Second one goes back to the temporary driver's license or your permits for
Right.
people that are undocumented. So they have to prove that they're here and they're paying taxes to get that, correct?
Yes.
So if they're undocumented, how are they paying taxes? Is that like an identity theft crime that's going on too?
No. You can actually get a not a social security number, but a taxpayer ID number. And a lot of people have been doing that in anticipation of DACA or other federal green lighting of immigration reform. People are trying to get their taxes paid in advance in anticipation so that there's a wait. They don't have to wait forever by showing that they're paying their taxes, because there was discussion early on about that. So you don't necessarily have to have a social security number. You can get a taxpayer ID number and pay your taxes under that.
I had a follow-up to that. As someone who was involved in a car accident, a major car accident with someone who did not have a driver's license, I don't know their documentation status, but they were an immigrant. They had no driver's license. They ran a red light. Both cars totaled. I had my 15-month-old child in the car. Fortunately, nobody seriously injured. Anyone who's traveled abroad knows that driving rules and practices vary widely with countries. So what are we doing in that bill to ensure that not only they're paying their taxes, but that they actually know how to drive here and not put our citizens in jeopardy? And yeah, we ended up having a problem with then her husband's insurance didn't want to cover our damage because she didn't have a license. Now, if they have a permit, maybe it'd be covered. I think that's would the insurance cover them? And how do we keep our citizens safe? How do we make sure they know how to drive here?
Right. Well, that's the biggest part. That's one of the biggest parts of the bill is they have to actually pass the driving test. And in states that have done this, most people who apply to failing the test 3 or 4 times before they pass it, partly because of language issues and partly because the rules of the road are different. They have to go out and learn them before they can pass the actual test. But that in the states that have done this, they have a big reduction in hit and runs. A lot of the hit and runs that occur today are people who are undocumented and they hit and they don't want to stay and identify themselves, but if they have temporary ID cards, they tend to ID themselves. You also have an increased amount of people getting insurance. Most people don't realize this, but there's actually a Virginia auto insurance premiums tax. So if people get auto insurance, they're actually also paying more into our general fund, our taxes that way. If we require them to pay taxes, they're actually paying taxes. If we had 300,000 people claim $35,000 of income every year, there's 300,000 estimated undocumented. If they declared 35,000 income, it would generate $1 billion in new tax revenue for the Commonwealth. So we need to do everything we can to encourage these people to get into our system and follow the rules of the road, get car insurance, which would also, by the way, the more people get car insurance, the less all of us pay because that spreads the risk across everybody. So, I mean, from my point of view, you know, people who are not documented want to come in, identify themselves, take a test, put themselves on a list that the state's going to keep, you know, and it's going to make everybody safer and more tax revenue. I think that's a good thing. Yep.
I want to first tag on to what he was asking you about on the PII. Thank
The
you
what?
for doing. I want to
PII?
add on to what he said
PII,
about
personal
identifying.
Okay, got it, okay, got it.
PII and internet, whatever. I would like it to be where we have to opt in for any information, not an opt-out. Because once you have been sucked into this, to get out of it is just as hard. Because it's a lot like signing up for information out of either party right now. Because you keep getting these mass emails and you try to opt out of the emails and you get more because they've done sold your information again, it seems like. Anyway, I would like to see more of a chance to, if you're going to have information gathered on a site, would be an opt-in to have that information collected, not versus being opted out.
I'm gonna add even on to that.
Okay.
So many of these sites today, by the way, I'm a software and electrical and a systems engineer, so I know a lot about this stuff. They're defaulted to checked versus unchecked. So when you say opt in, I also want the site to not have the box checked by default to opt in, meaning that I have to actively click the box
To opt in.
to opt in.
Instead of having to check the box
Or
again
uncheck it.
to opt out.
Right. So like, I look at this as HIPAA. My personal information should never have been available, right? It should never have been able to be sold, right? That's always been personal identifiable information. And internally to companies, that's how we've always had to deal with information. Why it's okay to go company to company with information, but not internally from manager to manager or person to person with personally identifiable information.
And I got Gmail. I get an email from Google once a month where I can go back and look at my location history because I haven't turned it off. But I leave it on just because I'm curious and I think it's interesting. But if I go into my Google location history, I can go back and look for the last 5 years and see exactly where I was at any date and time. Where I was, whether I was going forwards or backwards, what stores I went to, it's all in there. Back 5 years, archive on me. And if you have an Android and you have Gmail, it's in there on you, unless you opt
Turn
out.
off your location.
Yeah, because you opt in. Yeah, I could turn off my location, but I'm just telling you, but I didn't decide to do that. One day they started sending me emails and say, hey, we thought you'd like to see this. I was like, holy, oh my God. But in any event.
That's how we start to find out though that we're actually tracking our data is because
Yeah.
all of a sudden they send us something.
Right.
The second thing I would like to ask is, what's going on with the reciprocity and the declination for concealed handgun permits, and they're talking about doing away with reciprocity with the surrounding states?
I think that bill was introduced in the House. It was not introduced in the Senate. I don't anticipate any action on that this year. That might come up next year maybe, but this year I don't think that's part of it. I don't know what the House is going to do. I can tell you in the Senate we're not interested in going beyond the 4 bills that either the 3 we passed and the one we're going to pass Tuesday.
Okay. And last thing, and just, we appreciate, Senators, both of you being here, even though the representatives would say that they had a fear of some extremists or whatever. We thank you for actually coming in and entertaining our questions, our concerns, and at the same time being able to tell us what is going on down there. We appreciate that.
Can I
Here, here.
piggyback on that by saying thank you for not building fence outside? We appreciate that.
Okay.
There's a question, this gentleman on the right first.
My question is about the duck lines in Fairfax County. What's the reasoning behind that? Removal of?
Yeah, that's my bill. So there are 3 creeks in Fairfax County where you could, with the state, can license duck blinds. Little Hunting Creek, Doe Creek, Great Hunting Creek, and there are significant hundreds and hundreds of houses within close proximity of those blinds. About 14 years ago, well, first, in addition to that, in Fairfax County, you're not allowed to hunt ducks with a rifle. It's illegal. It's another local ordinance that they passed in Fairfax. And so, even though Fairfax, you can't hunt ducks with a rifle, you can still lease a blind. And so, people kept leasing blinds by mistake, and it's creating confusion. People were worried people were going to illegally hunt. DJIF agreed to stop lease or to put out information about the blinds about 14 years ago, so that people knew that you couldn't hunt there, so they stopped leasing them. When DJIF went to an electronic blind registration system, they couldn't put the information out to say you can't, in Fairfax you can't hunt. So people started leasing blinds in the county again, and the posts started going up. People started freaking out that people were going to come back and start hunting ducks again. And by the way, it's technically legal to hunt ducks with a bow and arrow out of a blind. Although I don't know anybody who would do that.
Yeah.
But so anyways.
Rifle, but it's just shotgun prohibited there?
Yeah, it is. So DJIF thought to just end this problem, I should pass a law to just specifically say they can't lease out blinds in Fairfax County, or at least in those 3 creeks, which are in the state-controlled waters parts of those 3 creeks, just so it doesn't keep becoming a problem. They just wanted a legal solution instead of having to go through a 2-year regulatory process. So that's why we did it.
People putting blinds in, but they aren't hunting.
They put their stakes down, and so
Thinking they could.
thinking they could, and then the neighborhood blew up, people in the canoes saw them, and they called me and screamed that, the hunters are coming back, and it's just a lot of drama
This
and
isn't
all
gonna,
that.
this isn't gonna spread throughout the rest of the state, right?
No, not, I mean,
Well, there's conflicts. I mean, I remember, I think Senator Stewart carried a bill on riparian rights because of the proximity to homes.
there was a state delegate, somebody put a blind in front of another state delegate's house down there,
Yeah.
she got mad, so she got him to put a bill in.
100 yards is
It's a conflict in a lot of areas that, are hunters in the community. It's just the nexus of where homes are going close to rivers. And that conflict is going to, I think, continue to play out.
And right now, you can't hunt within, I think, it's like 500 yards of a subdivision, I think, but.
100 yards from the road.
And I think a subdivision too, but a lot of times you don't know if you're near a subdivision in the woods, and anyway, there's issues like that that come up a lot.
500 yards from the subdivision, it's, right now, you gotta be within 50 yards of the road.
Right.
You're not supposed to be firing weapons within 100 yards of your home.
Right, right. You know the rules better than us, yeah. By the way, I have to wrap it up in about 10, maybe 15, 5 minutes. Okay,
Quick,
so we need,
very quick.
yeah.
You're on the P&E committee. Ranked choice voting, there's a local option bill.
I support ranked choice voting. Everybody know what that is? Everybody know what, okay, ranked choice voting basically says that if you have a multi-candidate race, like there's more than 2 people running, you have to put down your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, your fourth choice, so that somebody can't win with 20% of the vote. So that, basically everybody casts a vote. If nobody has a majority, they drop off the person on the bottom and they go to their second choices and then retotal. And they drop off the next person and retotal until somebody gets 50%. Some people think it's a much better way to get a consensus candidate rather than having like a 5, 6, 8, 7 candidate field, which you see in some primaries, and somebody wins with 30% when everybody probably would have preferred somebody else. So that's what ranked choice voting is. I support that.
Then you get someone that nobody likes.
No, I think it works pretty well. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm Dr. Kylie Shear. I live in Bristow, Virginia. And I had a question. My understanding of the intent of the red flag law is that we've identified that someone poses a credible threat to others, that this has been investigated and vetted, that they pose a threat.
Yes.
I think we all agree that's somebody that needs mental help. They need help. What are we doing to help that person? What are we doing, funding resolution? How do we get that person to a state of mental well-being so that they no longer pose that threat to themselves and others? Understanding that may not always be the case, but rather than a temporary solution of removing them from the home or taking their guns, what are we doing to invest in that person that needs our help?
The overall, there's a couple different components, I guess. First, I'll address the mental health access one. That's a community-wide issue. I mean, outside of these, we did start the CSB same-day evaluation. It's been some spotty implementation so far. We have been increasing a lot of the resources based on the Deeds Commission work. You might recall several years ago, Senator Deeds, our colleague, his son almost killed Senator Deeds and then killed himself. Senator Deeds was really bad shape because he didn't have access to a state facility and to get him committed. So there's been several years worth of work to increase access to beds, evaluations, and the rest of it. So there's a larger context and fix that's been working on. I know the Deeds Commission just had a meeting right as session started, and they had some legislation that's pending. I haven't seen it yet. So things are still a work in progress in that regard.
Yeah, so the standard for the red flag order is a little bit different than the standard for a TDO. A TDO is a temporary detention order when somebody's suicidal. And the standard for the red flag order is upon a finding there's probable cause to believe a person poses a substantial risk of personal injury to himself or others in the near future by such person's possession or acquisition of a firearm. So what the red flag orders have to do with somebody being at risk to everybody else because they have a gun, as opposed to they're suicidal.
And my point is, we need to get them help.
We
to
do.
not just take their guns and then they go get a car or a knife or, something.
Yeah, mental health, I agree.
That's-
Mental health is one of our
Get that cured
most
within.
difficult things we deal with. It's one of the most underfunded things we deal with. There's not really mental health doesn't have a real lobbyist that comes down and advocates. But Senator Deeds, you know what the Senator Deeds' situation?
Yeah.
But do you know what happened to him?
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
just-
in detail. We're originally from California, so we're newer to that area, so we don't know a lot of the history of the state yet.
Okay, well, Senator Deeds' son was having a severe mental health crisis, and they couldn't find a bed for him. And because they couldn't find a bed for him, his son basically attacked him, cut his face with a knife, and ended up killing himself before they could get him in a bed because they theoretically couldn't find a bed for him. And Senator Deeds has made it his personal mission to try and get that system fixed, get it better funded so that we don't have a situation where somebody's in crisis and we don't have anywhere to put them. So he's working hard on that.
The other aspect is mental health parity in terms of our pay rates to doctors to mental health. There's a lot of disparities. We also needed to increase our residencies for students coming out with to gain their medical licensure. So there's lots of different systematic things to the system. We've been working to increase over the years. We're not there yet. There's a lot of workforce and supply chain issues, medical reimbursement at the state and federal level that have all need to come together to really increase it. That's important throughout systematically.
So what I heard you say, Senator, is that since Senator Deeds was attacked by his son, is we're actually working harder to try and broaden the mental health care for the state of Virginia, but we have to build a system to actually capture that, correct? We have to have more doctors, you have to have more facilities, you're gonna have to have more training, you've got to do your residencies and things like that. But it's an effort to try and build it. Obviously, it's not something we can take and change overnight because it's just like opening the Army to all women. You can't do that just overnight, and it has to be done incrementally. We get that. We ask to continue to push for that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So the ranked choice voting, I was wondering, doesn't that potentially eliminate both parties in the election?
It depends whether you do it. First of all, I think it's going to be proposed for primaries and not for the general election. I'm not positive about that, but it's more of an issue in primaries. But if it was in a general election, yeah, it could. I think in statewide, they've done it in Maine, right?
Statewide, they've done it in Maine. They do it for they just added the presidential election in Maine
Okay.
for ranked choice.
Yes, Maine's been the most aggressive about it. I think the bill that's pending is only primaries, though. if I'm not-
It's local option.
Okay, so for local government races, I mean, I guess in council races, which tend to be less partisan, some are completely nonpartisan. Like, for example, the Fairfax County School Board race. Prince William too, Prince William School Board race. So we had 3 people run for Prince William County School Board Chairman, right? So if, for example, if Barbara Lateef had only gotten 45%, you would have dropped off the person on the bottom, and all those people's second votes would have been reallocated to find out who, whatever. If it had gone that way.
Well, it concerns me because a lot of people don't view primaries as very important, so you get a lot less voting in primaries, which could very effectively, eliminate one party or the other from the general election.
We're not like California, where they eliminate. We're always in Virginia. We still have Republican and Democrats on the general if they file. So I know in some states they do.
So you're
the
doing it
majority
for both
and eliminate.
parties?
Yeah,
And
it's
then
just this-
ranking
it's-
them for both parties,
Correct.
and then the top ranking
That's
for
right.
each party.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't eliminate any party from the ballot in Virginia. Everyone, if you file, you can still file for the general. All that's there. It would just be for the primary. And then you could also do it differently for the general as well.
And there are more than 2 parties in Virginia.
Yeah.
Well, but that just to make a point that, you know,
Bob,
you
you-
don't want to eliminate a party from the ballot.
Bob, you're gonna have to be last, because I have another meeting I have to get into.
Thank you for saying that you'd rather address the bodies after the tragedy than preventing the loss of innocent life. Where is the clairvoyance to know how this would be enforced? And what is keeping red flag laws from being used punitively like we're seeing in Colorado, where a woman said she had a child with a police officer and was trying to get a red flag order. That actually was allowed for him, but it's the sheriff that was refusing to enforce
So
it.
Bob, a couple of things. First of all, I don't know what Colorado's law is, or Florida's, other states. In the Virginia law, if somebody wants to do a red flag order, the allegation either first of all, there has to be an investigation of this. So somebody just can't go down and tell the magistrate, blah, 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 and then they enter the order. So there has to be an investigation by law enforcement. There has to be, the bill we're
That's not Virginia.
the bill we're gonna
Talking about
pass.
the bill here.
The bill we're gonna pass, it has to be supported by either 2 law enforcement officers or the Commonwealth attorney after an investigation, have to sign the petition, number 1. Number 2, the order gets served, the person has a chance to voluntarily surrender their guns. If they don't surrender their guns, then a search warrant can be issued. If they do surrender their guns, then that's it. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. Under the hearing, they have an opportunity to be represented by counsel to contest the allegations. Under amendments that I pressed, the person accused under the order can ask for continuance so they get more time to prepare. It's important. Listen, I've tried to defend protective orders on 5 days' notice. My clients come in, it takes them a while to get the money to hire me, then it takes me time to go find the papers, then it takes me time to figure out what's going on and talk to witnesses. Sometimes you need more than 14 days to prepare.
Yeah, disarm domestic violence victim.
Okay, well, anyways, you can ask for continuance. Under amendments that I sponsored, you can also do discovery. It wasn't clear under the law that was proposed whether you could actually send out subpoenas to obtain information, whether you could conduct discovery to find out what the allegations are against you before you have to defend yourself. So I put those due process protections in. And then if it turns out that whatever the person said was completely bogus and made up, you can sue them for abuse of process, for malicious prosecution, and you can sue them for money and get money out of them.
That's clean up afterwards.
So those are some of the process protections that are in it.
That's clean up after there's a body and a casualty.
I got a question though here, and this goes back to, okay, so you've been served, you get your picture taken, everything else. The next thing you know is...
No picture taken.
Well, I mean, if you were arrested because of whatever happened or something of that nature, the next thing you know is here's the website that we were talking about, that now then they've got your stuff out here and you're being listed as having had a protective order served against you, blah, 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 blah. If you pay $100, we'll take this off. Again, it kind of goes back to the PII information and what they're selling on people.
I agree with you. That's a problem we have to fix. Right now you can't expunge a domestic protective order even if it was completely unfounded. And that's a problem.
Exactly.
I've tried to put in legislation to fix that, and it's hard to figure that out. We've tried, and I agree that's a problem we need to fix.
One final question, sir, if I may. You go through the process, you figure out the red flag law was used, bogus charges. At what point does the accused individual get their property back?
As soon as the order is dismissed. Hey, folks, I got to get into another meeting, but I think this is the biggest turnout we've seen for a Woodbridge Town Hall, so we appreciate you all coming out. We appreciate the interaction. A lot of good questions today, and so thanks for coming.